Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the Voice of Reason. Today, I want to discuss lessons in reality. Yes, we've had lessons in insanity, and some of you may listen to this and believe it is another lesson in insanity. And some of you may be right to believe that. Now, the election cycle is fast approaching here in the United States, the dis-United States, the un-United States. I cannot go back to a time in my 50-some-odd years on this earth and think of another time that we have been more divided, more fractured. And obviously, I can't go back to the time period during the first U.S. Civil War. I'm sure that if we were to go back in time and we were able to retrieve content that was produced by individuals from that time, having a discussion about what happened, the lead up to the Civil War, I think a lot of things that would be said would mirror what is happening now here in the un-United States of America. Now, the powers that be, the unitary one-party state, which, as we speak, is attempting to place its political opponents in prison. Right now, it is targeting the prior duly elected U.S. president. And I have a great concern that that last president, Donald Trump, will be the last duly elected, meaning a product of the American people's will within the constraints of a constitutional republic. What's happening right now, the constitutional republic is going by the wayside. We are heading towards a totalitarian democracy, which will then lead to a totalitarian unitary one-party state that has the veneer of a democracy, but in reality will not be a democracy, will not be a constitutional republic at all. Now, the powers that be in Washington, D.C., are telling us that the Russians are a threat to Western Europe. That if the Russians are not stopped outside of Kiev, the Russians will continue a march westward, conquering Poland, moving into Germany, and possibly other parts of Western Europe. That is what the mainstream media wants you, if you are an uninformed urbanite watching this, and there are some, there may be many. I would say the majority of the persons who watch this program are not part of the uninformed urbanite class. The people that normally watch this program study and understand history. They also study and understand military capabilities. And the military capability of the Russians to move into Western Europe is simply not there. Now, if we go into the future and we look at capabilities, if the Russians were to take control of all of the Ukraine, would that enhance Russian capability? Maybe, possibly, but not to the effect that the Russians would be threatening Western Europe. And I don't see that happening. Now, the same people, the same folks, the same cabal that is running the United States from behind the scenes, the same folks that are telling you that it is okay to take a 13, 14, 15-year-old mentally ill child and castrate him and turn him into what he believes himself to be, a female. So the same people that are telling you that is okay, it is okay to castrate and mutilate children under the guise of sexual debauchery. It is okay to do that. And those same people are telling you that we, the United States, must protect Ukraine. We have to protect the Ukrainians. The most corrupt nation state in Eastern Europe. We must protect them. Now, the same people that want to bring in adult, perverted transvestites and have them tell stories to 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds, perverted sexual stories, adults with a glaring sexual fetish, they're perfectly okay with that. At the same time, they're telling you that, hey, Russia is a threat to Western Europe. Now, what created the current Russian policy in terms of how it interacts with the West? How did this come about? Did the Russians suddenly decide that the Ukraine, that Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, maybe Romania, were just states that the Russians felt did not need to exist? Or is it possible, again, these are the same folks that are telling you that it's okay to have transvestite story hour with 7-year-olds. Did these individuals leave out the fact of what happened with the expansion of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization? When the Soviet Union collapsed, it was made very clear to the Soviets at the time that the United States, that Western Europe, sought no eastward expansion. In the late 90s, the early 90s, when the Soviet Union was collapsing, if the Soviet Union was on the precipice of collapse, if the powers that be at that time would have told the Soviet premier that in the not too distant future, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, Slovakia, Hungary, Bulgaria, and more importantly, the Ukraine, would be swallowed up in this Western alliance with the goal of changing the body politic of the Russian Federation. Look, the stated goal of both the powers that be inside of the Ukraine, the powers that be inside of Lithuania, these neoliberal governments that now exist, they are openly calling for the breakup of the Russian Federation. They are openly saying this. Again, some of these governments are also telling you that we need to have transvestite story hour for your young kids. We need to take your kids privately away from you and have debauched sexual conversations with your children about how they may not be girls or boys or whatever gender they actually are, whatever biological sex they actually are. And that is taking place in the school systems in both Western Europe and, more importantly, here in the United States. Does that concern you at all? Again, the same folks that are doing that are telling you that, well, we may need to break up the Russian Federation. We may need to divide it. We may need to see separate states start to exist. We need to start funding opposition groups, and we're going to start inside of the Ukraine with that effort to break up the Russian Federation. Now let's flip the story. Let's hypothetically say that in the early 1990s, the West did not win the Cold War. Let's hypothetically say that the Soviet Union won the Cold War. In 30 years after this Cold War, the Soviet Union was now creating puppet states in Canada and Mexico. Yes, the Soviet Union is now creating puppet states in Canada and Mexico. These states have now embraced communist, Marxist ideology. Furthermore, the Soviet Union is now seeking to break up what remains of the United States. The Soviet Union, who won the Cold War, is now making claims against Alaska. Alaska is not really part of the United States. It was illegally purchased by the United States for an improper amount of compensation at that time. It is also discussing openly with the citizens of Texas to seek a union with Mexico, meaning break off Texas from the United States and have it merge with Mexico. It's also creating and fomenting the breakaway of other U.S. states. Now look, if that was happening, the United States, if it was able to at a certain point recover, would look and seek to change those efforts. They would seek to remove the Soviet puppet state from Canada, remove the Soviet puppet state from Mexico. There would be efforts to disallow a communist ideology to permeate in Texas, California, and some of these states that are attempting to now break away from the United States. Would you, as an American citizen, be okay with that? Again, hypothetically, if the Soviets had won the Cold War, and the Soviets had then moved into Canada, Mexico, and were seeking to cause problems inside of the United States, eventually seeking the breakup of the United States, what would we do as Americans? There was a movie that came out many, many years ago. It was a movie that I believe was in the early 80s. It was called America. It starred Chris Christopherson. If you get a chance, have a look at that movie. Have a look at that movie, because in many ways, what is now happening in these Russian border countries, these border states, is the same thing that I'm talking about along the lines of that hypothetical scenario. So are the Russians concerned? And do the Russians have a right to be concerned? Maybe. Is it possible the North Atlantic Treaty Organization pushed too far? Would we, the world, would we be in this position if the North Atlantic Treaty Organization had not decided to push east, specifically into Romania, Poland, and more importantly, actual Soviet states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, even Georgia right now is going through some very turbulent times. Very turbulent times. So you explain to me, comment in the comment section, what you think. Where's this heading? Do the Russians have certain legitimate grievances? Do they? Again, I've talked about this before. If we were to go back into the 1980s and you were to mention to me that the Ukraine had broken away from the Soviet Union and was now looking to join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, I would then ask, probably at that time, have all nuclear attack submarines, ballistic missile submarines, been launched into the Pacific and Atlantic Ocean? Are we on the verge of nuclear war? And I have to wonder, if we were to go back in time and we were to have this discussion with the Soviet leadership right up just before the collapse of the Soviet Union, and say, hey, this is what the world is going to look like. Do you want to rethink what you are doing? What do you think they would do? Do you think they would hit the pause button on the so-called opening up? Probably. Probably very much so. Very much so. But feel free, comment in the comment section. Tell me what you think. Obviously, we're going to get the uninformed urbanite that listens to NBC, CBS, CNN, ABC, and takes what they're being told via those news outlets as fact. And the reality is, you, the uninformed urbanite, simply don't understand history. Simply don't understand what is happening right now. And where this eventually is going to lead. Because it's not a good place. We are heading towards a very, very dark place. Whether it's here in the United States, with the insanity that's happening, with the radical Marxist, neo-Marxist left, utter insanity, the breakdown of the constitutional republic here in the United States, the globalist push towards world war. It's coming. It's on the way. The question is what happens next? More to come, as always. Thank you for joining us. Have a good day.